I still remember the moment she said it. The light over the dining table was warm and golden, the kind that should have made everything feel gentle, but it did not. Chloe's voice cut through the laughter, sharp and clean. "Get out." The music stopped. 50 guests fell silent, their champagne glasses suspended in midair. My father's face was unreadable, but then he nodded, slow and deliberate, as if confirming a truth he had been holding onto for years. My mother's lips curled into a small, satisfied smile. It was the same expression she used to wear when Chloe hit the perfect piano note at a recital. I did not say a word. No tears, no pleading. I just placed my wine glass on the table, straightened my coat, and walked toward the door. They thought I was leaving in defeat. But that night, I was not walking away from them. I was walking toward myself. And by the next morning, I would sign the deed to an $18.5 million mountain mansion in Colorado, paid in full. Silence had always been my truest language. When I was a child, the only thing that visited my room without judgment was a thin beam of sunlight sneaking through a crack in the wall. That was the room nobody wanted. The one beside the staircase, next to the plumbing that hissed and moaned all winter. They said I was the strong one, so I got the smallest space. Chloe's room, on the other hand, had lace curtains and 2 massive windows. She called it the palace, and everyone laughed like it was true. Chloe was the family's masterpiece. Even her laughter had its own echo in the house. When she tripped, Dad rushed over with panic. When I brought home my first perfect report card, Mom did not even look up from the dishes. She just said, "Good. Now go quiz your sister for her math test." I learned early that praise was a shared resource and Chloe held lifetime ownership. I did not resent her then. I just accepted that my role was to make sure everything around her kept running. Dad's rules were simple. Do not argue, do not make a scene, do not ask for things. Asking implied wanting, and wanting made people uncomfortable. Silence was easier. It got me through birthdays where Chloe blew out towering candles while I cut the cake, through Christmases where her pile of gifts dwarfed my secondhand books. By the time I was 16, I had already discovered that logic made more sense than people. Machines did not lie. Circuits either worked or they did not. On most afternoons, I sat cross-legged on the concrete floor of the garage, surrounded by broken radios and loose wires I had rescued from the trash. When I managed to fix something, a crackle of sound, a flickering light, it was like catching proof that I existed. The acceptance letter came in the spring, folded neatly inside a white envelope from a top engineering program. Full scholarship. I held it like it might burn through my hands. At dinner, I waited until Chloe finished talking about her upcoming choir solo. When the room finally fell quiet, I announced the news. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mom folded her napkin and asked how I would manage. Dad asked if I could afford to leave. Chloe twirled her hair and smirked. "You will be back in a month. You hate change." I stared at her, searching for something that might resemble affection, but all I saw was amusement. The morning I left, the house smelled like coffee and dust. Dad waited in the car, engine running. Chloe stood by the door, arms crossed, hair perfectly curled. "Do not make it sound like you are escaping," she said. "I am not escaping," I replied softly. "I am beginning." My career started in a brick building in Denver, working for a tech company where the air was thick with the hum of servers and burnt espresso. The first few weeks were chaos, but I stayed quiet, learning patterns and mapping personalities like algorithms. That was where I met Sarah Hayes. Sarah was the technical director, sharp, calm, and ruthlessly honest. The first time she stopped at my desk, she pointed at my screen. "You rewrote the logic on this patch. Show me." I did, nervous but clear. She watched the code scroll, nodded once, and said, "You just saved us 3 weeks." Sarah became the quiet axis of my days. She taught me to speak up during meetings, even when my voice trembled. "If you disappear in your own work," she told me one evening, "someone else will take the credit. Do not make it easy for them." Then came Damian Vance. He arrived one Monday morning, a new developer with tousled hair and a knack for making everyone laugh. He was quick, ambitious, and relentlessly charming. We started collaborating on small projects, and for a while, it worked. He made the room feel lighter. But there were brief, sharp moments that unsettled me, like when he would take my ideas during team meetings, rephrase them, and suddenly everyone would applaud. Sarah noticed. Before she left the company for a better position, she warned me. Be careful who claps the loudest. Some applause is just for themselves. I wanted to believe Damien was different. A few months later, he sat across from me in an empty office. You ever think about what is next? He asked, turning his laptop toward me. On the screen was a rough sketch of a financial application. Modern. Intuitive. We could call it Northlight. We could build it ourselves. Within a month, we quit our jobs. We rented a basement office with a flickering lamp and a coffee maker that spat steam. We wrote code until our fingers bled. I worked 14-hour days, sleeping on a broken couch, managing the back-end algorithms and bug reports. Damien was the frontman, pitching to investors and charming the press. When Northlight hit 15,000 users, we celebrated with cold pizza. To us, he said, raising his paper cup. But as the months blurred, the cracks began to show. He took longer lunches, came back with new contacts, and offered old excuses. One afternoon, I opened the company inbox and saw an unfamiliar subject line regarding a term sheet review. It was from a massive venture capital firm, forwarded from Damien's personal account. My name was nowhere on the thread. That night, I waited in the office until he arrived. You are selling Northlight, I said quietly. He froze, running a hand through his hair. It is business, Clara. You get too emotional about these things. I am just finishing what we started. I stared at him, realizing the depth of my own foolishness. I hope the noise you chase is worth the silence you will earn, I said. 2 weeks later, the investors pulled out of our original structure. The money dried up. The office emptied. I packed my files, unplugged my monitors, and walked away from the only thing I had ever built. The first winter after Northlight fell was the coldest I had ever known. I rented a small apartment above a bakery in Denver. Every morning, I woke before sunrise, made terrible coffee, and opened my laptop. I started a new folder on my desktop. I called it Lantern. It would be a financial platform that adapted to the people who needed it most. No empty promises. No charming spokesman. Just quiet, brilliant utility. I could not do it alone, so I reached out to Sarah Hayes. She demanded I show her something real before she committed. I did not sleep for a month, coding the entire skeletal structure of Lantern's adaptive engine. When I showed her the demo, she smiled proudly. Let us make it louder, she said. We worked out of coffee shops, building a foundation of empathy and math. When we launched the beta, we had no press releases. Within a month, we had more active users than Northlight ever did. When the media began calling, Sarah stepped forward as the public face. She was polished and articulate. I stayed behind the curtain, letting her take the applause. You are the ghost in the code, she joked. I preferred it that way. 2 years passed. Lantern became a massive, undeniable success. We filed patents, secured massive funding, and grew exponentially. And I never told my family a single word about it. Chloe's name occasionally appeared on social media headlines as a wellness influencer and business coach, but I always scrolled past. I did not need them to see me anymore. Then, the cream-colored envelope arrived. An invitation to Chloe's 30th birthday party in Austin. On the back, a note in my mother's handwriting, "Hope you can make it home, sweetheart." Home. The word looked foreign. I told myself I did not care, that it was just another performance for the favorite daughter, but a lingering curiosity forced me onto a plane. I wanted to see if the fire still burned. The house in Austin looked exactly the same. When I walked into the backyard, 50 guests were mingling under string lights. Chloe stood by the fireplace in a white dress, radiant and loud. Mom greeted me with a brief, assessing glance before turning away. Aunt Claire squinted at me like I was a ghost, asking if I was still doing that tech stuff. I stayed near the hallway, watching the party from the periphery. During dinner, the speeches began. Mom toasted her beautiful girl. Dad called Chloe the light of the family. Then, Chloe stood up, her champagne glass catching the light. She thanked everyone, basking in the adoration. She waited until the yard was perfectly quiet. "And let us not forget my big sister, Clara," Chloe said, her eyes locking onto mine. "The one who disappeared for years. You guys probably did not even know I had a sister. Seriously, where did you go? Witness protection? No photos, no headlines. Did you get abducted by monks?" The guests chuckled politely. My mother's face froze in a panicked smile. Chloe smirked, waiting for my reaction. When I gave her nothing, she leaned forward. "Come on, say something. Remind us you exist." I stood up slowly. "I think I already did." Her smile faltered. Her tone turned sharp, venomous. "If you cannot be part of the celebration, then maybe you should not be here. Get out." The silence that followed was heavier than any sound I had ever known. Mom let out a nervous laugh, calling Chloe dramatic, but Chloe did not back down. She stared at me with pure disgust. I looked at her, then at the guests, pretending not to see. I did not argue. I just turned toward the gate. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes. I ordered a car to the airport, changed my flight, and headed back to Colorado. For the first time, I understood that silence was not surrender. It was the sound of letting go. The very next morning, the ink dried on my greatest quiet victory. 6 months of anonymous negotiations through a private firm had led to this. I signed the final deed to an $18.5 million mansion perched high in the Colorado mountains. The funds came directly from my initial Lantern buyout equity. No one in my family knew. The house featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking untouched snow and pine. It was a fortress of peace, entirely mine. A few days later, my operations director flagged an email in our internal system. It was a brand collaboration request directed to the Lantern team. The sender was Chloe Sterling. She wrote about how her media presence was facing a temporary dip due to false accusations, and she wanted to partner with Lantern for digital empowerment. She had no idea she was writing to me. I told my team to ignore it. By Monday, the temporary dip became a total collapse. A boutique fitness chain posted a statement exposing Chloe's unpaid partnerships and unreturned emails. Other vendors joined the flood. Lawsuits for fraud and breach of contract were filed. Chloe's brand was trending for all the wrong reasons. The same audience that had worshipped her was now tearing her apart. I sat by my fire pit, watching the snow fall, feeling absolutely nothing for her. Then, the internet did what it always does. It dug deeper. A tech podcast uploaded an episode titled "The Real Founder Behind Lantern." They played a leaked clip from an old internal panel where I spoke about being underestimated by my own family. Within hours, internet sleuths connected my initials on the early Lantern patents. Someone dug up the grainy cell phone video from Chloe's birthday party. The footage showed Chloe screaming, "Get out," at me, while Mom laughed and Dad smirked. The two narratives collided with brutal force. The comments wrote the story themselves. Chloe was the fraud who humiliated her genius sister. I was the silent architect who built an empire and walked away. That evening, my phone rang. An unknown number. I let it ring twice before answering. "Clara," Chloe's voice trembled. "Is it true? That you are the one behind Lantern?" A heavy pause followed. "They're saying you planned this. That you wanted to destroy me." I stared out at the dark silhouette of the mountains. "I did not plan the fall, Chloe. I just stopped cushioning it." She sobbed into the receiver, but I hung up. The next morning, Mom called. Her voice was thin, shaking with anger and desperation. "Is this how you get back at us? You let them connect the dots. You are letting them destroy your sister." "I did not start the fire," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I just stopped putting it out." "You think you are better than us now?" she snapped. "No," I replied softly. "I just stopped mistaking silence for love." I ended the call and blocked their numbers. I did not issue a public statement. I did not grant interviews. I let the noise devour itself while I remained completely unreachable, suspended $18.5 million above their drama. Spring finally arrived in Colorado, melting the snow into eager rivers. I sat on my terrace, the morning light spilling over the peaks, going over paperwork with my assistant, Tess. We were finalizing the first recipients of a new foundation I had entirely funded. We called it the Left of the Stairwell Scholarship, dedicated to young women in engineering who had been overlooked, underestimated, and forced into the smallest rooms of their lives. I looked at the photos of the girls in the application files. Girls who fixed radios in garages, who studied by flashlight, who believed their only worth was in their utility. I was going to make sure they never had to build in the dark again. I walked through the massive, sunlit halls of my home, running my hand along the gleaming wood of the grand piano I had bought just for myself. I pressed a single key. The note rang out, pure and unbothered, echoing through a house that held no ghosts, no judgments, and no conditional love. For years, I had whispered into the dark, desperately wanting to be seen by people who were determined to look right through me. But as I stood looking out over the endless Colorado horizon, I realized the most profound victory was not their destruction. It was my absolute indifference to it. If you have ever been the quiet one in your own family, if you have ever been told to stay small or step aside to let someone else shine, tell me, what would you build if no one was watching? Would you go back and knock on that same locked door? Or would you build a new one entirely? I would love to hear your story in the comments. And if you found even a small part of yourself in mine, stay a while and subscribe. There are more stories waiting about women who turn silence into strength and strength into peace. Because sometimes, the quietest voices carry the furthest.